All right, let's have people come in. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We'll give people time to trickle in. We know it's the end of the workday on the East Coast or wherever you are. So let's have everyone join. Just as a reminder for those of you joining, that as we go through this presentation and conversation with our speakers, please put your questions, thoughts, any sort of insights that you gain into the Q&A section in the webinar, and we will make sure that we will make it a discussion more than a presentation so that all the questions are answered. And we know it takes a little bit of time for people to finish their meetings and come in, so we'll start in a couple of minutes. And as people are joining in, would you mind just in a chat saying where you are joining from so that we have an idea of where people are time zone wise and everything else, kind of make it a little bit more of a community, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah, one of our speakers, Kaihan, is actually in Paraguay today. Any specific place? Arizona, fantastic. And then, I suspect, we have Akiko from Japan. Oh, welcome. New Jersey. Yeah, so we're all over the place. Palo Alto, Toronto, Phoenix. Wow, terrific. Halifax. So as you can see, we're a very, very internationally dispersed crowd, lots of interest, and all the more important for us to speak about proximity, right? As we're so spread out again around the world. So let me get started. I know that people are going to be coming in. I'm Anna Tavis, your host for today, department chair and clinical professor here at New York University in New York City. And we host Rethinking Work Series. And our guests today are world-renowned experts in strategy, innovation, entrepreneurship, investment. So couple of introductions, Kaihan Krippendorff, who actually did teach for us. We remember that and really grateful. Is a global business strategist, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network. And he's helping Fortune 500 companies to think away from conventional strategies and really tap into innovative growth approaches. He's a world-renowned speaker and author of multiple books and publications, and he's focusing on strategic thinking for organizations in the era of very rapid change. And his co-author, Rob Wolcott, is a professor, adjunct professor of innovation at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, as well as Kellogg School of Management, and the co-founder of the World Innovation Network. Rob also bridges academia and active venture investing. He dedicated himself to guiding companies on how technology transforms business landscapes. And they're here to talk about their latest book on proximity, the proximity revolution. And on this note, here's how it's going to go. We're going to have kind of a grounding in what the book is about that Rob is going to share, and Kaihan and Rob are going to talk about it. And then we are going to have a conversation about what it all means to us, to the future of work, and to the business at large. On this note, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Anna. It's great to be here. And thanks for your support and the center's support throughout the development and the launch of Proximity. What you do in the future of work, by definition, affects all of us. So we're pleased to be here. So Kaihan and I decided I'm going to spin up the concept and give you the basic idea for 20, 25 minutes or so, and then we'd love to have a Q&A. But as you opened on mentioning, there are people joining us right now from multiple continents, in fact. And I remember early on in COVID, I was having a conversation with a colleague in on another continent about proximity. And I was explaining what this proximity thing was. And the basic punchline, and I'll get back to the detail later, is that proximity asserts that digital technologies compel the creation of value ever closer to the moment of actual demand. And so we're talking about this. And my colleague who was in London at the time said, well, that sounds nice, Rob, but what's going on right here on this Zoom screen is that this doesn't feel very proximate. I mean, I'm in London and at the time I was in Evanston, Illinois. And I said, well, that's true. But in fact, this proves what we're talking about. What I mean is, it doesn't matter where we physically sit. The value is being created right here on the screen between the two of us. And this is something that a decade ago was very rare. I mean, you remember 10 years ago, if somebody was joining on a conference call, you were in the office, you're in the meeting room, there was that little thing that sat in the middle of the table, and there was a voice, a disembodied voice on it, and no one paid any attention to it. That was probably, Jim, who was on vacation but really needed to join the meeting. So everybody kind of ignored Jim. And then everybody's having the meeting, and occasionally this voice would pop up, and people say, oh, I think Jim's trying to say something. And they would, act intently for a minute and then get back to the meeting. Well, now today, the Zoom, the team, it's a normal course of business. So this is actually illustrative of proximity. So where this concept came from originally was I was at a conference in 2014, a technology conference, and it didn't feel like we were getting much foresight because people kept saying the same things, like a decade from now, 1 trillion devices will be connected. Okay, well, that's fine, but I think we already know that. I don't think you need to tell us that. We need better foresight because we're all here trying to figure out how to place bets. We're trying to figure out what to invest in, what to do with these technologies that are rising all over the place. And so it occurred to me to ask a question from my years ago study of economics. And that is, in economics, there's something called the general purpose tool. It's GPT, but that's a coincidence. ChatGPT is generative pre-trained transformer. So in any case, a general purpose tool is any technology or set of technologies that can be applied across an economy to a whole range and variety of different things. So think the steam engine, for instance, or the electric dynamo. And when you can discern the operating requirements and opportunities of a steam engine compared to an electric dynamo, you can actually start to predict the future. So the question became, what is fundamentally different about how digital technologies operate? And by digital, Kaihan and I mean everything you'd think of and more. So certainly mobile apps, AI, 3D printing, rooftop solar, controlled environment agriculture, anything that is digitally enabled. So digital technologies, compared to the industrial age, digital technologies allow us to compress capabilities of all sorts into smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy ever closer to each moment in time and space. And so therefore, and this is proximity, therefore, digital compels the creation of value ever closer to the moment of actual demand. And note that Kaihan and I aren't just saying we need to respond faster to customers or use AI to deliver your packages better. That's all great stuff. But it's a far more profound trend, and it is predictive of where every industry is going. And that's the case that we make in the book. So I'll transition, if I could do make the technology work here and try and share the slides. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So as I said, this journey started in 2014, and we started to unpack this notion of the distributed coordinated nature of digital and then how it compels value creation ever closer to each individual customer user in a market. And we realized that there were a few distinctions that were really important. So one was we make in the book, especially in chapter 2, we make a clear distinction between the production of product, services, experiences and the provision of products, services, and experiences. So production would be making something, writing something, creating something. Provision could be supply chain, sales, support, service, distribution, that sort of thing. And when you think about that, you realize there are many ways in which our lives are already very proximate. So the easiest way to think about this would be video streaming. So we all know Netflix. Today, you can essentially watch any video you want, anytime, anywhere, on any device. Netflix, YouTube, Disney Plus, you name it. So the provision of video content is, for the most part, entirely proximate already. But what is not yet entirely proximate is the production of video content. So that content was probably produced months ago or maybe decades ago if you're watching Citizen Kane. But where are we right now in the generative AI revolution? We're just at the knee of the curve for where generative AI can create video content on demand and even for an audience of one. So this is just an example, and there's no sound of this video except my voice. This video was created on Sora with a few prompts in less than an hour. And by the way, there are no woolly mammoths. So it would have been hard to call your animal provider in LA and get a bunch of woolly mammoths to do some video work. This was created in just moments. Now, it's still early, but imagine where we'll be in 10 years, 20 years. We will have the ability to create video content on demand for an audience of one from whole cloth. And this is not a guess. This isn't, well, I wonder if one. We know this is going to happen. We don't know when exactly. We don't know who's going to win, but we know it's coming. So this is the book.
Rob, if I just could say,
Yeah.
Again, I'm here at a conference in Hollywood, and we just had a presentation from NVIDIA that actually is working on this personalization right now. So this is already available. So it's not just going to be Netflix with a huge database of those movies, but those movies are going to be extremely personalized to the viewers. Yeah. So I'm
absolutely. I mean, I was jealous Anna, when you said you were at this Infinity conference in LA. I mean, first of all, I wonder what Infinity feels like. That's got to be, pretty broad. But second, it's when you start to digress on this for a second, when you start to combine that capability of generative AI with virtual reality, imagine where that will go. And actually in the book, we talk about this in the final chapter, the chapter about virtual reality in space. And those are our conclusions because those are the two horizons of the 21st century. Those are two places humanity has never been before, but we're going this century. And we don't have time to talk about it today. If you want to in Q&A, when you can create whole lived experiences in wholly experienced virtual reality in 10, 20, 30 years, then you literally can create from whole cloth and entire lived experiences. So in the book, we separate different, what Kaihan and I call realms of life. So we look at proximity and how it's impacting and rolling out in how we work, eat, create, and produce, how we prevent and cure, how we power, and how we defend. And they each work a little differently. They're all driving toward proximity, but they have very different characteristics. So as I provide some opening examples from a variety of industries, Anna, as you and I agreed, I'm not going to talk much about the future of work in these remarks, but after this, we'll have a conversation. So what I'd love for people to think about, because then Kaihan and I are eager to learn from you and your colleagues, because you're in the middle of this every day. How might work change in an increasingly proximate world? The way I like to think about that question and that objective is the objective for work is how do I bring the best people and systems? So could be AI, or could be any sort of technology or process. How do we bring the best people and systems to the right objectives wherever, whenever? To me, that's the essence of proximity in the context of work. And just to give a brief foreshadowing, Kaihan and I are, reasonably competent, pretty smart. We can kind of figure out a whole range of industries. But we also know that we need to refer to people who really know their stuff. So in each of the How We chapters, we work together to find a couple of super experts in the food industry or in the defense space or in power generation or in this case in work. And so for the research for the book, we asked John Bremen from WTW to read the How We Work chapter and comment on it and challenge us and push. And John and I have known each other for years, so we had a number of conversations about what proximity could mean for work. And he said something I think that's rather profound, which is changing where changes how. And so maybe that's something we can come back to. In this concept of proximity, you will increasingly have, and this is the trend for the rest of our careers across every industry in different ways, anything, anytime, anywhere. That's sort of the punchline of proximity. So let me start with software. And by the way, proximity applies to products, services, and experiences, digital or not. But let's start in the digital realm. So back in 2017, I wrote an article complaining that people kept saying if we just teach kids how to code, they'll have a job for life. And I got increasingly upset about that because that's not true. Now it's great to know how computers work and great to know how to do some coding. Don't get me wrong. But the notion that we'll just teach kids how to code and they'll have a job for life is ridiculous. And then I heard, so usually I would hear politicians say this, so you can kind of, cut them some slack. They're doing their best. But then I heard the CEO of Apple, who's brilliant, say this. And so I wrote an article and posted it in Quartz entitled, "Later This Century, Knowing How to Code Will Be Like Knowing Ancient Greek. It'll be really impressive, but only good for very specific purposes." And so as a result of that, I was contacted by Gary Hoberman, who was the CIO of MetLife at the time. And he was just at that moment stepping down from his job at MetLife to start Uncork, to be what he shared with me, a leader in the no-code movement. And I have to admit, in 2017, I didn't even know there was a no-code movement. I didn't know what that was. But he said, "Rob, it's the movement to create platforms to allow people to create and operate enterprise-grade software without having to know how to code at all." Now think about that. And when he says enterprise-grade compliant software, their clients are insurance companies and banks. So the threshold for compliance doesn't get higher than an insurance company. And so what does this mean? Well, in the old days, you needed software. You probably spent months doing business and technology requirements documents, and then you did an RFP, or maybe your internal team tried to develop the software. It took a very long time, and by the time you were done, it often wasn't what you thought you wanted. With a no-code platform like Uncork, and there are others, today, right now, you can sit down, you don't have to know how to code at all, and you can create software to run your business within a matter of weeks or even days. And when I say it's real today, I can't tell you exactly because it's a private company, but they've passed $100 million in revenues. So this is a real thing. Back in 2017, when Gary founded the company, he couldn't find a single venture capitalist willing to invest in his concept. A year later, he had Google and Goldman Sachs as investors and partners. Thankfully, I invested along the way as well as a venture investor. And then a couple of years ago, they had a Series C round with a $2.1 billion, $2 billion market cap, $2 billion valuation. And so this is real. And think about what this means from a work perspective or a proximity perspective. When you can take that multiple month cycle of developing and rolling out software, and then it's kind of hard coded, and if you want to change it, it's often difficult. Contrast that with a platform that allows you to create and operate and iterate software in a matter of days or weeks, and it's already real. Now let's shift for a little bit to physical products. Today, we have a global supply chain optimized for scale manufacturing at a distance. In other words, the larger my plant, the lower my costs. Not always true, but for the most part. Over the rest of our careers, this model will be ripped apart. It will become what we call hybridized. So we'll still have large plants in China and Mexico, US, Germany, of course, where it makes economic sense. but we will also have mid-sized plants distributed closer to demand for certain kinds of products. We'll have certain products produced in urban areas, right where people live, and eventually on your counter at home. If you think for a second, the old model, how difficult it is to buy one matching fork, you kind of really can't in the current model, with rare exceptions. Those forks are made in China many months in advance and put on a ship and into inventory, and then hopefully Amazon or Crate and Barrel has what you want where you want it, and you're probably going to buy 12 in a package. But today, it is already technologically trivial to download a design file and print one matching fork. So what we're finding, and I've been tracking this for some time, it's accelerating right now. Anna, we always see new technologies hit that hype cycle and everybody gets all excited. Oh my gosh, 3D printing. And you remember this was probably 5 or 10 years ago. It had a couple of fits and starts. And then a few years later, people say, oh, see, I told you, that's not really going to work. It only works for little plastic baubles and things like this. Well, through that process, a bunch of companies go out of business for sure, but some of them rise up and some of them get better. And we're not just talking about startups. Ford Motor reported in their annual report last year for the year before that they had made 200,000 parts for automotive using 3D printing. So as we use it, it gets better and better. As we use it, we climb the learning curves. And over time, people find economically viable applications for these things, and they start to incur into markets and change the game. And meanwhile, Anna, what do we have? We have the decline of Pax Americana. It's one thing to build global, highly optimized supply chains when you have peace and stability in your supply lines, but they become very brittle when you have issues, geopolitical issues, severe climate events, perhaps pandemics. So we're seeing these are catalysts accelerating proximity, but what enables us to do it is digital technologies, which allow us to do things we could never have done before. So to give you a tangible example, this is the largest vertical farm in operation in the world today. It's in Dubai. In late 2022, I had the opportunity to speak in Sharjah and then do some research meetings. I met with this team. The company's called Bustanica. It's a few miles from the Dubai airport. They grow some of the best leafy greens and herbs I've ever had in my life. Really impressive. But here was the exciting part. When I got on my Emirates Airlines flight the next morning back to New York, the lettuce in my salad had been picked in this building the night before. Now think about this. So this is a partnership between Bustanica and Emirates Airlines. Think about this. The Emirates explained to me that the unit cost of each head of lettuce in this facility is much higher than it would be if they did it the traditional way. Now that makes sense. Everybody talks about that. But they said when they did the overall system math, and they compare that to growing the lettuce in Spain, harvesting it in advance, putting it on a ship, taking it to a warehouse, wasting about a third of it, which is what we do every year all over the world. We waste about a third of all food produced, and then hoping you have a good product for your consumer. Compare that with growing only what you need, near where you need it. You eliminate almost all waste and 98% less water to grow these leafy greens, and the consumer gets a far better experience. That's proximity. And it's been so successful for Emirates. Earlier this year, after we finished the manuscript for the book, earlier this year, they announced they were buying 100% of Bustanica. So they're integrating this not just near their hub airport, but they're starting to think about how to do it well beyond. Now, I'm very excited about this company. I just came back from the New World Space Conference at Houston Space Center, and Barbara was there. So I've known Barbara for a very long time. Barbara is a venture capitalist and French venture capitalist and plant scientist. And I didn't know this originally, but she's always been in love with space. So in 2018, she called me. We had a catch-up call, and she said, Rob, I would like to figure out how to grow food on Mars. And I said, I'm sorry, it sounds like you said grow food on Mars. And she said, this is what I said. And I said, wow, well, that's really neat science experiment, Barbara. And she knew I wasn't going to invest in that. I don't have a 60-year time horizon.
Mhm.
But she had just gotten a big grant from NASA, and that work continues today. In fact, Interstellar Lab was just selected by NASA amongst 300 competitors to be the company that provides food growing on the ship and then eventually on Mars for the pilot launch in a couple of years. So that they're making a lot of progress there. But Barbara and her team were smart enough to know that they need a real business back here on Earth. And so they made a list of all of the high value added, low volume ingredients derived from plants. So all of the very high value, very low volume ingredients derived from plants used by various industries. So it turns out they're located right outside Paris, which is great because who uses these products? Skincare, cosmetics, fragrances. And so just to give you, make this more tangible, this pod exists, and there are many more like it now, but this pod exists just outside the banlieue in Paris. This is us inside the pod. Barbara's giving us a tour, and my daughter's pointed out that that's my thumb in the picture, but anyway.
Mhm.
So in this pod, they're optimizing the growing conditions for each individual plant, the right amount of water, humidity, everything, to increase the expression of very specific chemicals. And to give you an example, this plant here is called Vertive. It provides an essential ingredient for L'Oreal, for many of L'Oreal's products. So L'Oreal is a customer of Interstellar Lab, as is Firmenich, as is Robotet, the largest ingredients company in the world. And why L'Oreal's interested in this, currently they source the ingredient from Vertive, from the roots of Vertive, from Indonesia. So the plant grows in Indonesia. They rip the plant out of the ground, chop the roots off, extract the chemical, and send it to wherever their manufacturing facilities are. In this pod, the pod actually sits in their manufacturing facility. And it grows exactly what they need, where and when they need it. They're completely absolved of any supply chain risk. They're not worried about what's going on in the Red Sea. They're not worried about extreme climate events, at least not for this product. They get exactly what they need, where and when they need it. And here's the exciting part. Vertive has already shown in the pod to have over 1,000% higher yield for this ingredient than in the traditional path. And most of the plants that they're running through these pods, they're getting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000% higher yield. So Barbara and her team don't sell the pods. They install the pods in manufacturing facilities and they manage them remotely, collecting data from each individual plant, optimizing growing conditions, increasing yields. She calls it hardware as a service. So because of digital technologies, AI, monitoring, sensors, et cetera, they're able to manage networks of these pods, giving the manufacturers exactly what they need, where and when they need it. Now, I'm going to bring this all together, this proximity concept, and quickly share the story of a company that is leveraging proximity across their entire strategy. Now, to be clear, Rick Smith and Josh Isner, the founder, CEO, and the president of Axon, did not know about proximity until I contacted them a little while back. I went down and had an interview with them. This will be an article out in Forbes probably this weekend about Axon. But nonetheless, I've been following them for some time, the past few years, because it's clear that this is what they have in mind. They're going to give their customers exactly what they need, where and when they need it, faster and better than everyone else. And it doesn't matter what the technologies are that are rising. Their mission objective is to take whatever technologies are going to achieve their customer objectives best and figure them out and lead. All right. So let me give you a little bit of the background. First of all, when you go to Axon in Scottsdale, Arizona, it's an unusual experience because Rick Smith, the founder, is sort of like Tony Stark, Iron Man, in a lot of ways. He's in love with sci-fi. So I showed up in their headquarters, and this is the entrance. And I don't know if any of your team, your colleagues here online recognize it, but it's essentially Men in Black. And you walk in, and there's a facial recognition thing, and it says, "Welcome, Robert," and the doors open like this. And I asked the director of comms, Alex Engel, when I got there, what's up with that? And she said, "Well, Rick said he wanted his entrance to look just like Men in Black, so that's what he got." So it's like this sci-fi environment, and it's important to their business and their innovation and their creativity. But how did this all come together? Axon started with tasers. So Rick was trying to mitigate the use of bullets and firearms in policing, trying to protect lives, to achieve the mission without killing people. And so he pioneered the taser, which we all know of, and the company grew for some time. But over time, they added more and more capabilities. So later on, they added the police body cam, which we're all familiar with, collecting data and video and sound from interactions all day long. And as they were doing that, they're collecting databases of all these interactions and doing analytics and using AI to understand what's working, what's not working, where are the issues, et cetera. And then back in 2017, they did a concept video to say, where could the future of policing be? And one of the things they predicted was, in the not distant future, we'll be able to take all these data from the police body cams and automatically fill out police reports. After ChatGPT launched, Axon said, okay, you know what? The technology is going to be ready soon. Let's do it. And earlier this year, they announced what's called Draft One. So if an officer wants to, they can take the body cam interaction video, push a button, and instantly their police report is completed. Now, they have to edit it, of course, and make sure it's accurate. But nonetheless, think of the extraordinary time savings for officers. Think of how much more time they can spend serving their mission of public safety as opposed to filling out police reports. You know, I'm sure they love filling out police reports, but but this is quintessential proximity, because the system sits there doing nothing until the moment that you need something, and it instantly responds. Custom. Meanwhile, they were also tracking drones, and they didn't know anything about drones at the beginning, but they said, you know what? Security and safety professionals are going to need drones for more and more things, so we'd better figure it out. So they started scanning the horizons and looking at the peripheries, what's going on in drone technology, what's going on in regulation, et cetera. They started with partnerships with drone companies to try and understand how those work. And then earlier this year, they announced they were acquiring 2 of those drone companies and rolling them into Axon. So their driving purpose is to say, what are all the things our customers, public security and safety professionals, might need anytime, anywhere, and how do we get it to them better than anybody else? It's quintessential proximity. Incidentally, if you need a proof point, this is their market return over the last 5 years. And this is a $30 billion or so market cap company. It joined the S&P 500 last year. So this is true visionary leadership, that where proximity is central to everything they're developing for market. So I'm nearing the end of my remarks. I have another a couple quick examples, but 3 things we're seeing are happening in a big way as a result of this proximity revolution. First of all, expectations rise. Certainly our expectations as consumers. You remember before COVID, if you ordered something online and it arrived in 3 days, you thought that was pretty good. If your package hasn't arrived in 3 days, now you're online trying to figure out what the heck happened. So our consumer expectations rise, but so do our B2B customers and also our employees and team members. The expectations of employees and team members have changed dramatically as a result of the rise of things like work at home, work from anywhere, Zoom, remote, et cetera. Proximity also allows us, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, in a significant way, to break trade-offs between customization and efficiency. We don't have much time to go into detail on this here, but if you think about the difference between a big traditional industrial facility making millions of copies of the same thing, as opposed to a 3D printer sitting and waiting for the need for one specific custom product, as we get better and better at doing that, as we build that hybrid infrastructure in manufacturing worldwide, we'll end up being able to do more and more customization in economically competitive ways. In fact, doing things we could never have done before. And one of my favorite implications of doing proximity right, Anna, is that waste declines dramatically. I mean, think about Bustanica in the UAE using 98% less water and wasting almost no food because they produce and use almost everything. Now, here's one of Kaihan and my sort of most exciting examples in the book. In fact, we throw Dr. Ling in the first chapter because it's just so shocking the first time you hear it that this is possible. But this shows what is possible. So Dr. Ling is a hero of mine, a very good friend. He is a little bit crazy. He's brilliant. He was a military doctor, retired not so long ago. He now practices at Johns Hopkins. He had 6 tours of duty in the Middle East. And in those experiences, they kept running out of generic drugs. Now, it's not a surprise that you're going to have drug shortages in a war zone. But what surprised me, and I didn't know this until Dr. Ling shared it with me, we have generic drug shortages in hospitals and clinics all over the United States every day. Dr. Ling tells me they have generic drug shortages at Johns Hopkins. Imagine that. So as he's in the war zone, he's standing there fretting over a drug that's being flown to him by a pilot in an F-16. Imagine that supply chain bill. And he thought, this is ridiculous. Generic drugs are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If I had the right chemistry set, I could make the drug right here myself. And so he went back to the United States, got a big grant from DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, worked with a team from MIT, and they figured it out. They did it. You can look it up. It's a private company called On Demand Pharmaceuticals. The technology is already at small scale use by the US military, but they're commercializing it. What does it do? Well, essentially, it's the size of a refrigerator, and it sits there doing nothing. It sits there with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, if any of you love pharmaceuticals, there are some APIs, yeah, stuff like that. But let's simplify this conversation. It sits there with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen doing nothing until the doctor types in, I need 1,000 doses of atropine. Or the nurse practitioner says, I need 300 doses of ciprofloxacin, whatever it is. And then hours later, out come 300 doses of ciprofloxacin, exactly the same as you would get at the pharmacy. And the FDA has already confirmed that the drugs that come out of this equipment are exactly the same as you get at the pharmacy. Now, think about how different that is from the existing model, making millions of copies of that pill at a plant, perhaps thousands of miles away. All of our generics are made overseas right now, which, by the way, opens us up to risks. And compare that to having the equipment where you need it and making only what you need. So the very exciting part, Anna, right now is On Demand has their first commercial implementation underway in Tupelo, Mississippi. They're working with a chronically underfunded health system in poor area, and they chose 6 injectables to start. After all, it's healthcare; they have to start slowly. But they chose 6 injectables, and from the moment they switched on the system in January till today, they've had 0 stockouts of these 6 drugs. And that's the first time in their history. So this proximity stuff is coming. And when you start to do the math, you realize it's going to take a while and it's going to look different in different industries. But when you start to do the math, over time, people will figure out how to do it far better than in the past. Just to use this example to illustrate, as many of you know, pharmaceutical drugs have a shelf life. Every few years, you have to throw them out and make new pills. The United States government, UK government, Singapore, lots of countries have a strategic stockpile of ciprofloxacin in case of a public health emergency. So the US has millions of pills in stockpile. Every few years, they have to throw them out and make new pills because of the shelf life. Now think about on-demand pharmaceuticals model. It's sitting there with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. What is the shelf life of carbon? Forever. So think about how the economics shift. Think about how the waste decreases. Think about how much more responsive we can be. Dr. Ling's dream is to have this equipment in Liberia and the Congo and Pakistan and other places in the world where they don't have access to generic drugs at all. much less in hospitals and clinics all over the developed world. So two questions I'd leave you with. First one is, what might your customers desire? And that could be your customers, that could be your employees, your team members, people with whom you work. What might your customers desire in the future when they can have anything, anywhere, anytime? When you start to think about that and don't let reality get in the way, you start to get some foresight as to what might be coming in the future. And then, of course, the question for each of us is, how will you lead the proximity revolution? So I'll stop there.
That's very thought provocative. And I think it is also, we've all experienced it one way or the other. And the interesting question here would be, and Kaihan, I would love you to jump in. Thank you so much, Rob. You know, since you are working with a lot of leaders from different organizations, what is changing at the leadership level and how it impacts, trickles down through the organization regarding skills, the kinds of organizations we need to build if we were to embrace this proximity environment?
Yeah, I think if you apply the same principles of compressing value into smaller parts, spreading them out and bringing them together at the last moment when and where they're needed. And if we look at an organization as maybe a vehicle to connect work that needs to be done with people who want to do the work, right? If we start compressing those two, waiting until they're needed, we can kind of get a vision of what an organization of the future can look like, a non-hierarchical, dynamic organization. And so what we can imagine is we maybe don't have jobs anymore, right? Don't have roles anymore, right? But this has been something you've written a lot about, and people have been looking at this. But when the role fragments into pieces, and now we can enable collaboration, we can enable people to find each other. And what I'm really excited about is the efficiency by which we can help problems find solutions inside an internal marketplace. We can shortcut that. And that is in part because we can search more easily. We can engage more easily. We can assemble the smaller pieces in the last minute. But also the people, you could think of as like a proximity to proficiency gets closer as we need less time to onboard. In part because AI doesn't require us to learn to code, right? So as an example, so if you start kind of put those two together, you start seeing a very different kind of underlying metaphor for what an organization is.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Rob, you've been answering questions here around remote working, because I'm sure a lot of people joined the call because they were thinking that the same conversation about distributed work, remote working, and kind of companies wrestling with the idea of, do we bring people on board, et cetera, et cetera. Have you explored how proximity, the ability to bring the work and the production and consumption all into one place, how is it going to affect that, what we've developed, proximity with a distributed workforce? It seems like it's going in the opposite direction.
Going in the opposite direction in what sense? What do you mean?
That the people who are remote are doing mostly predictable type of work, coding, et cetera, working on their own. Proximity, where I see the concentration of effort, is on the creative, collaborative design of how the workflow is going to be created, et cetera. So it seems like the pieces of work that could be outsourced and distributed are going to be automated, whereas the work that requires more human proximity, in addition to, supply chains, et cetera, will be in greater demand.
Well, so you've said a lot there. We could talk for hours about it, but I'll give you a couple of punchlines. First of all, we're at the very beginning of this very steep learning curve, or a series of learning curves. So what we're seeing is people trying to figure out, how do we parse out work in a way that people can be at different places? But we'll find out that that's not by any means the only solution. As you mentioned, layer automation and AI on top of this, and that changes what's possible where and by whom. So, for instance, I was talking to a couple of doctors last week about what they're seeing. And one of the really interesting things they saw was that the younger doctors, the new interns coming in, they said to a person are operating very differently. When there's something that they have to figure out, they immediately are going to their mobile device and looking up and starting now to use generative AI to pose questions to research databases and things like this to access insights and information, et cetera, in the moment wherever they happen to be. And so if you extrapolate that sort of concept out, you'll also find the ability to have centralized systems. It doesn't matter where those servers exist. That, from the user's perspective, doesn't matter where the servers exist, out in the cloud somewhere. But you have these systems that will be able to scan through reams and reams of research reports and synthesize them and make them more and more relevant in the moment, exactly where it's required. And that's certainly, you could see it as replacing humans who might do that otherwise. But really, I don't think that's the right way to look at that, because what does it do? It enables the people in the field anywhere to leverage that far more effectively, far faster. And things like one of the attendees mentioned hallucination. This is absolutely true, and it's a risk, and it's something we have to figure out. But that's why I keep stressing the learning curves. This is an engineering challenge, and people are working very hard on solving that. And what we're finding is there are certain places where already it's trivial to use generative AI and it doesn't cause many problems. And other places it's dangerous to do so. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to get better. The technology will get better. The methodologies will improve. The application and risk management will improve. So my point is there are so many different technologies rising to allow us to do what we need, where and when we need it. And it's not just that the rote sort of allocatable work like coding will be automated out. Much of it will. But an interesting observation, Anna, the easiest skills to automate are the hard skills. So people traditionally said the hard skills and the soft skills. Well, you know, it's kind of the easiest skills to automate are the hard skills. So I'm a huge fan of STEM, but what we need to do with STEM and how we need to think about it is very different than, say, a decade ago.
Yeah, totally agree. Kaihan, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree. I think that no, I don't have much to add, but I think that one thing that we start seeing is that as there is kind of lower barriers to entry to tapping workers and workers tapping, right? What we're seeing is there's a shift in the balance of power. And so I think companies are going to have to stop selling the same value proposition to every worker. One thought leader that we, Felix Oberholzer Guy, he described it this way. It's like companies, if they were hotel companies making hotels for their workers, they've got one brand of hotel. And you either take that hotel or you don't. And I think we're going to start seeing, which will be exciting for me as a worker and for all of us as workers, is actually more personalized work experiences that we can engage in.
Yeah. And as a final point, I know, Kaihan, you have an important presentation right after this. The message I'm getting here as well at this conference here is there's actually going to be more jobs. They're just going to be very different kinds of jobs. And we, in higher ed and in your, advising capacity, we will need to be working with organizations on how to make that shift from the jobs that we've been traditionally leaning into and teaching, certain skills from, kindergarten to expanding of what's needed. And the barriers, actually, the one message I'm hearing is that the barriers between, the science, the hard skills and the soft skills are going to dissipate. There's going to be, because there's going to be so much automation of that hard skill, and a lot more need for creative thinking, etc. So we are in the right place. It's been, if you have any closing remarks, please do so. And then
Yeah, I
we,
would,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I would just say we found this concept that we call P equals 0 to be a very helpful starting point in any area in work. Imagine what P equals 0 looks like. That is the hypothetical point at which when a need arises, the solution to that need or the value for that need is immediately not only created at that place, but also at that time. And then that can lead to steps to get there. There have been a couple of questions about whether you have to be large to seize the opportunities. A company has to be. I don't think it has to be, because historically you just need a small step. If you can get the taxi, you can get your car to the curb 30 seconds before the taxi cab company does, then you can be Uber. It doesn't require a big leap in proximity to seize the advantages. So it doesn't require you to be large.
That's terrific. So many great ideas for us to sit on. Thank you so much. Just a public service announcement here. Our next one is going to be on skill-powered organizations. Again, back to skills with Ravin Jisathasan, a leading Mercer consultant.
Oh yeah, Robin's great.
Yeah. I hope that we can build on, all of the great ideas that you just planted here. Thank you all so much. Have a terrific rest of
Anna,
the day.
if I could
Yep.
just add one thing, I'm always on LinkedIn. I love hearing from people who are thinking about proximity and seeing interesting things. Please feel free to reach out.
Yes, fantastic. Yes, both Kaihan and Rob are very active on LinkedIn. Let's give them a big round of applause on LinkedIn, on social media, and thank you so much. Keep doing your good work. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anna.